Good morning. I'm Terence Hallmark, the Business Development Manager at UKTelehealthcare. Thank you for joining today's digital event. As we wait for the final delegates to join this morning's event, I'd just like to go through a few updates on the programme and a few housekeeping items. So, as you can see from the programme, we have another full 2 hours for you today. Today's event is a follow-on from September's event where we focused on falls, so covering detection, medication and prevention. So all the presentations and the panel will concentrate on these areas. We have at the moment we have now 3 presentations for you. We had a late change due to the call of duty. So we'll have 3 presentations from EasyLink, Your Meds and Legrand. And then that will be followed by a panel session. Those presenting will also join the panel session, which will be chaired by Phil Bridges from Oyster. And joining the presenters will be Aaron Edwards from the National Programme Lead for Telecare in Wales. Also Tracy Downs, Clinical Application Specialist from Tunstall. And not on the programme, James Lampert from NRS will also join today's event. I encourage you to ask questions. You can ask questions following each of the presentations and during the panel session. If you could use the chat facility, directing your questions to both the participants and attendees, and that will enable everyone attending today to follow the full conversation. All the presentations and a recording of the event will be made available on the UKTelehealthcare website following today's event. If you'd like to share today's event, please use, as you can see on screen, the UKTHC News or the #text. So now I'd like to start the proceedings today with our first presentation. And our first presentation will be given by Mike Dines, who is the Managing Director at EasyLink. So Mike, if I could ask you to start your presentation, please.
Hi, my name is Mike Dines. I'm the Managing Director of MedPage Limited, probably better known as EasyLink UK. Our business was established in 1984, and we've had quite a long association with assistive technologies. Originally supplying products to aid deaf people, various types of alarm clocks, baby monitors, things like that. We then moved into a medical field when we invented an epilepsy alarm, and we achieved accreditation to ISO 13485, which kind of changed the direction of the business, because we then found ourselves supplying hospital equipment and realizing there was a demand for fall prevention equipment and a variety of other products. So we have quite a diverse range of fall prevention products: bed alarms, chair alarms, various sensors that can be worn either for individuals or multi-patient monitoring, and various ways that they can connect, either an in-house alert to a living carer, or if it's in a care home, it might be care assistance where radio pages would be used. If it's off-site alerts, then we would look at GSM mobile technology or Wi-Fi connectivity. So the best way to explain what we do, how we do it, and why we do it is probably to have a look at a couple of scenarios. So this one, I might as well confess now, it is from a personal note, because it's based on experiences that I had with my own mother. So mum was living on her own, and she had pretty sparse visits with healthcare workers or care providers during the day. She was starting to become the queen of falls, falling from a bed, her chair. She had type 2 diabetes. And well, this line here, she subconsciously developed her own strategy to prevent falls. So she started refusing to take a drink or to eat regularly, because as a result of intake, she knew that she would go to the toilet and more likely fall. So her falls increased, resulted in several lengthy bouts of hospitalization, until it got to the point where I had to intervene and develop a system with the aid of my son, who's the technical director. So I told him that this kit was for his nana. So we come up with various options. Now, the first thing that we wanted to deal with, and we already had this product in existence, was using personalized messages to encourage mum to drink and eat during the day when we weren't able to go and help her. And this would be in between periods where our care workers went in. So the first thing we introduced was a product called the Memory Bell. And we'd been using this product since the original model came out in 2007. But this really helped mum, because my wife and I recorded messages. It's time to have a drink, it's time to eat. And things did improve. But we knew when we visited her that she wasn't having as much fluid. Her care workers were telling us that she was refusing to eat at dinner. And I knew she was still at risk. So, yeah, that's a message reminder going on. So we started off with a prototype that was developed. And there'd been so many false alarms, which was an absolute pain for myself, if I'm honest, because to actually achieve a reliable monitoring system where you're not going to have too many false positives, you can't rely on one sensor. So the original concept we used was to have a talkback function. So as an example, mum would get out of bed, that would start an alarm timer. She'd then walk into a hall, be detected by a movement sensor, that would start another timer. She maybe visits the toilet, she comes back out, and all the time, as she makes contact with the sensor, the previous one's deactivated. And that worked fantastically, because we had incidents, one where she only had a lunchtime visit and we weren't able to visit her that day. So she'd had a fall and she'd bashed her head on the side of a TV unit. And not a major cut, but it's quite a serious cut. She wasn't found until her carer turned up at 8 o'clock the following morning. And you can imagine how we felt, but she was absolutely devastated. And she actually spent 6 weeks in respite. And the doctor actually said to me, for every half hour that somebody's on the floor, it can result in a week of recovery. So we then went on, and one of our partners we work closely with, we developed this system, which has been available for a little while now. And this is a MPCSA 11, which is a smart monitor. And it can either be used for in-house monitoring or in a care home or a hospital, where there are several hospitals who are already using this system. So there's a cordless bed pad, there's a cordless chair pad, and then there's auxiliary products such as a warm full sensor or a movement sensor that can be added. So the MPCSA can actually monitor 3 sensors with a talkback function. So a typical setting, maybe in a care home, for example, would be the lady or gentleman gets out of bed, they sit on the chair. Now, in any other circumstances, the minute they're out of bed, the carers would have alert, or if it was connected to a community alarm or a dialer, that would be raising a call and creating a false positive. But because of the way the system works, the person is allowed to move from the bed to the chair cancels the bed alarm, and vice versa. And when we started using that system with Mum, the first time that I received an alarm, and this one we'd actually connected via Wi-Fi, she was only on the floor for 20 minutes before we received an alert and was able to get to her and help her. And as a result, the ambulance crew turned up. They were there 20 minutes to take her vitals, and she was okay to stay at home. So that was kind of evidence that system really worked, and it continued to work for as long as she stayed with us. And if we look at another scenario or the outcome, so this is all pretty standard stuff, I suppose. She feels safer in her home, falls are reduced. We've introduced memory prompts to encourage eating food and drink, so it reduces delirium. Of course, it's great for the family because they're not so worried knowing that there's a guardian angel that's looking after the loved ones. Main thing on this list is that the undiscovered fall time is reduced. And to me, that was so important. And it's also very important where a hospital admission may be the result, because when somebody's been on the floor for 12 hours, there's a lot of work for them to recover. So let's have a look at another one on a more bright. This is quite a common scenario, and again, personal experience, not my parents, but 2 sets of parents of friends. So we've got a chap that's looking after his wife, and his wife is prone to getting up. She was wandering, but during the night, the old boy takes his hearing aids out, which makes him severely hearing impaired. His wife gets out of bed, and she'd been having falls, but he doesn't hear her getting out of bed. So there's various types of ways that equipment, especially our equipment, can be used to provide a solution for this type of thing. So this one, it's called a CTM3, very basic. This is a bed alarm which has, you can't actually see it because my video's over there, but how this works is you've got a sensor patch which would go under her side of the bed. There's an alarm controller which has a recordable voice prompt. So you record a voice prompt, stay in bed, love, or, I'll help you in a minute. So in use, how this would work is the bed sensor would be placed under her side of the bed. There would be an alarm unit which contains flashing lights and could have a vibrating pad to go under the pillow. So the old boy with a hearing impairment is alerted. So the wife gets out of bed, it triggers the voice prompt. At the same time, the flashing light receiver is activated to wake the old chap up. He can stop his wife from having a fall. And a similar situation can be used during the day because the elderly seem to be reluctant to admit the fact that they have problems. And despite being told to be careful, they still think they can do things, and I think that's common to everyone as you start getting a bit older. Your mind's still 18, but the rest of you clearly is not. So during the daytime, similar approach could be used. You could have a chair sensor, which would link to the flashing light alarm receiver, which would allow the old boy to wander around the house. Or, of course, he could use a pager. So we're not going to be able to stop every fall. It's impossible. But what we can do is make sure that help arrives more quickly, which is more beneficial to the service user. It's cost effective to the local authority or ambulance care services. So by introducing assistive technology, if it's suitable, it's a win-win all round. We have quite an extensive range of products, and we're quite often told that it's difficult to choose the type of kit that we want, well, or that's needed. And it's quite simple, really, because there's two things. It's what do you want to detect, and how do you want someone to know about it? So this is our range of portable receivers and pages. Some of them are more high-tech than others. This is our range of pressure sensors. So there's basic cable sensors, there's wireless sensors, which come into their own if you have an aggressive dementia patient or children or adults with autism who are going to experiment with cables or more likely destroy them if they see a wired product under the mattress or under the chair. So there's a whole range of sensors, and basically it's giving you all the tools to do the job. Here is our range of alarm transmitters and controllers. The NMDTX universal transmitter is quite a special piece of equipment because it is supplied with programming software, which is free for Windows PC. The product is conveniently small. It can be used with various bed sensors. It can be connected to any alarm device. It's capable of standard alarm transmissions to short range pages, which would be typically 100 to 200 meters, or it can be programmed in a POXAG format to allow data messages to be transmitted to a data pager. It also contains a signal repeater. So, for example, if it's a large house or a care home, you would have one device connected to the sensor. A second device can be used to extend, basically double the range of the alarm transmitter. So, for convenience, most of our systems are available as a kit. And if the system needs to be expanded, like for example, if somebody has a full sensor that's worn and they're at risk from wandering, you can simply add a door alarm, or you can add a movement sensor, or you can go from a single bed alarm up to a 99 bed monitoring system. And there's a couple of forms that really help if people are unsure about what equipment to specify when they're doing a falls assessment. So we've done a little form. It's just a simple form where you're assessing a client, and pretty straightforward. It's running through a typical scenario where you just tick and select the type of care package or falls prevention package that's required. You can either search the attributes on a website and it will give you a list of suitable products, or you can request a database and searchable spreadsheet, even this form if you if you wanted a copy of it. And it makes it real simple if people are unfamiliar with the range of products that we have, or they've missed out on some of our training sessions. And I think that's me out of time. So thank you very much for listening, and take care.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for your presentation. Mike will be joining us again on the panel. So for now, thank you, Mike, and we'll move on to our next presentation. And our next presentation will be from Priti Patel, who is the head of sales at YourMeds. If you could start your presentation, please.
It says I can't until the other participants stop sharing. Is that okay?
Thank you, Priti.
Great, thank you. Good morning. My name is Priti Patel. I'm head of sales at YourMeds. As Terence kindly introduced me, I'm just going to start timers out. I don't know everything. So YourMeds, basically, we aim to simplify medication management through innovative technology. We started our journey in 2016 when we developed the first colour-coded MAR charts, which are now industry standard. And in 2018, our co-founders and directors realised that the elephant in the room was actually medication in the community. So they were trying to support elderly parents with their medication, but there was nothing out there that could tell them when the parents had accessed their medication and what had been taken. So they sat down, and knowing the pharmacy workflow and understanding how medication is distributed through the care home side, they created YourMeds Smart. So I'm going to today explain why medication data is really important to understanding why people fall. I feel that medication is kind of ignored a little bit within falls. We recognise that lots of people who are at risk of falls maybe take 3 or 4 medications or more, but that's about it. We do some medication reviews, maybe within the NHS, but we're not actually looking at adherence in terms of how are they taking that medication. We know that through our technology, YourMed can improve people's health outcomes and therefore increase the independence of the service users and improve their life choices. YourMed supports people to take the right medication at the right time with support from their family and friends. So why is medication important? The NHS and World Health Organization widely recognise that only 50% of all medication is taken as prescribed, but no one really knows how medication is taken in the community. We issue 1.5 million standard dosset boxes in England every week through the NHS, but often you can go into service users' homes and you'll see stacks of them just sitting in cupboards because the medication was never taken. In the UK, the NHS spends 9.61 billion on prescription drugs in the community, and it's widely recognised by academics that increasing adherence to 80% across 5 diseases would save the NHS £500 million. But the true impact of poor medication is actually felt in social care. Some councils, like West Lothian Council, will commission 15-minute medication visits to support people to become more adherent with their medication. Other councils don't actually commission medication visits, but then their social workers will add an element of personal care in there to ensure that medication is supported. When it comes to falls, 1 in 3 people over the age of 45 will fall once a year, and that increases to 1 in 2 once they hit the age of 80. We spend 4.4 billion on falls every year in the UK. That includes 1.1 billion in social care. Hip fractures account for £2 billion of this sum, which is a crazy figure. So these are identified as the main risk factors for falls. So you've got lower limb weakness, history of falls, and there's lots of strategies put in place to sort of support things like exercises and also med reviews. But actually, I want to focus on the postural hypertension, the cognitive impairment, and polypharmacy. So these are the widely recognised as the main drugs that cause falls. So you've got 2 categories, one with where the blood pressure decreases, So you've got posterior hypertension, and then the others where you've got sedation, confusion, and unsteadiness. So we've looked at our care home and our basically our medication database, and in our database of 50,000 people, 2 out of 3, so 66%, take one of the key medications highlighted in this table. 1 in 6 take warfarin, dioxin, or codeine. So polypharmacy is a key issue that needs to be monitored. Fall prevention is therefore a holistic problem, and we need to look at all aspects of it. And medication is a really key component of this. Everyone understands that taking medication properly is important, but for the first time, we can show why it's important. And this link is a clinical step. So we need to incorporate medication data as a key tool alongside things like the sensors that other companies offer. And just why does every dose matter? Well, because when medication is taken, we want to try and get people into a steady state of that drug. So if they're sporadic in terms of taking the medication, so they might take 1 and then miss 2 and then take 2, it doesn't allow them to hit that sort of drug therapeutic range, which is that steady state here in between the green and the red levels. So just a little bit about Your Meds. At Your Meds, we believe that technology should be inclusive, and your digital literacy shouldn't really stop you from accessing support. Our oldest current user at the moment is 97. Similar to an advent calendar, the smart tag shows a number and when it's the right time to take the medication, and the user opens up the corresponding box on the pack. The tag works off mobile data, so there's no need for expensive Wi-Fi or broadband. The packs are filled by the pharmacy, by a local pharmacy, and again, we've made sure that the packs work within that pharmacy workflow, so they can be filled by pharmacy robots as well, so we can scale. And in the last 9 months, we've signed up 150 independent pharmacies. Those pharmacies have tended to be in areas where we've been working with specific councils. So when we start a project, we would onboard some pharmacies, and then we would onboard the additional pharmacies as the program continues. A user can nominate up to 5 supporters to help them become adherent. 10 minutes after the initial alarm, the first user is informed. And each user knows where they are in the pecking order. So if you're the 5th supporter for that user, you know the 4 people ahead you haven't done what was intended. The supporters are informed via a supporter app, which is linked to the user. So on that app, they'll just see the blister number that needs to be taken and when it was supposed to be taken. So you can see Mrs. Jane Smith, blister 13 in the morning. And you can see how they've managed their medication yesterday, what's due today, and what's due tomorrow. The supporter can phone the user directly through the app, so they don't need to find that telephone number. And the third part of our system is the dashboard. Here, everything's recorded. The social care team can track adherence, when supporters are informed, and what action has been taken, so that it gives them the full audit trail. Pharmacists can also remotely adjust their schedules here. Our solution is also insured by Lloyd's of London, so care workers not insured to administer medication can support with the Your Meds system. We're really proud to say that Your Meds is made in Britain, and we own all of the IP and technology, and all our processes are held in-house, which allows us to be really flexible and agile. We strongly believe in co-production, and through our engagement with West Lothian Council, especially in the early days, we made sure that our technology is fit for purpose and provides them with the data they require. So the impact of Your Meds basically helps you increase capacity within the system. West Lothian Council saved 6,500 visits by putting in the Your Meds system. Leeds Council saw a return on saw that they managed to keep a user in their own home for 88 days using Your Meds, which saved them £7,190. West Lothian Council recognised that they get a 9 times return on investment. I think that's a little high, but even in Leeds, they recognise a 6.5 times return on investment. And we believe that our data allows people to make decisions based on data. So in West Lothian, what they do is that daily task of taking medication every day gives them a great cognitive assessment tool. So they can pick up quicker than care and family members that someone's cognitive ability is declining. You can download the Leeds and the West Lothian case study from our website. We also know that 1 in 4 of our medication rounds is adherent because of a support or intervention. So, you know, Your Meds is a really simple way to support people without it becoming too intrusive. So looking at our lockdown data, so we did some number crunching over the summer when everyone was on holiday in August. And on average, we have an adherence rate of 84.4%. During lockdown, the adherence levels went down slightly to 82.2%. Our male users are more adherent at 81.7%. But what was interesting was that our over 79s are actually the most adherent with 90.5%. Our under 79s were slightly less, but I think that's because they go out more, so they're not around as much. They might have pop out a little bit more. These are some of the councils that we're working with at the moment within various different sort of areas, from reablement, supported living. I'm still trying to get a hospital discharge programme up and running, but you know, so if anybody wants to work with me to support hospital discharge, please get in touch. We've just started working with Amicus 24 to support Worcestershire Council. By the end of the year, we expect this number to go up to about 11 councils. In Wigan, we've started working with the domiciliary care teams to again increase the capacity within the system. In Manchester, we're doing some interesting work with Parkinson's and Stroke District Nursing Team to reduce the workload on the teams. And the early data shows that by improving medication, actually the service users are able to be discharged from that service because they're suddenly actually managing their medication better and are gaining their independence back. But what's interesting in Manchester is the carer burden on the primary carer is reduced. Firstly, through the user becoming more independent by taking on their own medication, and that with Parkinson's it can be up to 8 rounds a day. But it also allows extended family members to support effectively without it becoming too onerous on them. So it allows the primary carer to get some of their independence back. In South Tyneside, we've just started a programme again to help people medicate more effectively in the community. We operate an open API and are happy to push our data into other platforms to provide a 360-degree view. Polypharmacy is recognised as a risk to falls and medication reviews are conducted. And we think that medication adherence up till now has been ignored and it needs to stop really. So Your Meds is a simple and easy way for technology to be integrated into that telecare provision. I'm going to show you a video that we've just created to explain the Your Meds system. That's me.
Thank you very much, Pretty. Pretty will join us again on the panel with Mike shortly. So for now, thank you. Just to remind you, as an apology that the MediQuip Connect presentation won't be happening today, but the presentation will be available on our website following this event. So for our final presentation, and I encourage you to use the chat facility to ask questions. You will have an opportunity again to ask the questions of the panelists and the presenters in the second part of this event. So now I'd like to invite Stuart Carroll to present. Stuart, you could join me, please.
Morning, Terence. Morning, everybody.
Morning, Stuart. I'll hand you over to Stuart Carroll from Legrand Care now. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Terence. Okay, thank you, Terence. Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Is that all right?
Yes, you sound good. Thank you.
Super, thanks. Good morning. My name's Stuart Carroll. In addition to being the National Sales Manager for Legrand Care, I'm also a bit of a stand-in this morning for an unwell Kathy Burston. I mention that because I am going to reference a case study at some point in the presentation, and the customer is one of Kathy's, and they've worked together very closely. I'm going to talk today about how our digital products and services can help form part of a tech solution designed to improve lives and facilitate independence in the home for longer. But I'm also going to highlight that the technology doesn't often fully succeed in isolation, and how a collaboration of partners working together with mutual goals is the best way to achieve shared positive outcomes. So who is Legrand Care? Legrand Care is the new brand for the Legrand Group. We're specialising in innovative development of connected solutions for the social and healthcare sectors. It's hot off the press. It was officially launched last month, and it brings together 5 specialist brands into a single one. In the UK, you'll recognise the brands of TimeTech, JohnTech and Aidcore. And from Spain, supplying primarily into the Nordics, you may have heard of Neat. And then there is Intervox supplying the French and the German markets. These 5 brands have over 40 years of experience from multiple markets, including many that are ahead of the UK when it comes to digital, designing and manufacturing solutions that allow us to introduce safety critical into any environment that an older or a vulnerable person could call home. So as you can imagine, between the 5 brands, there was an overlap in the technological offer and sometimes confusion regarding which one you should be engaged with. Legrand Care will pick out the synergies, remove the confusion, share learning and goals, align the roadmaps, and develop what we're calling convergence projects. And that will lead to better products, faster to market, more cost effective, and therefore achieving better value for our customers. Legrand Care will have a global presence, whereas brands such as TimeTech and JohnTech were largely country specific. And when you look at the combined statistics and the data, you can see the vast experience that will power this new business unit. Present in over 40 countries, a turnover in excess of 65 million, over 3 million connected individuals, handling in excess of 25 million events monthly, but most importantly, actively and collaboratively working with over 500 stakeholders and partners. A single mission and vision designed to care for the people who care, acting as technology partners to all stakeholders in health, care and housing, public and private, offering comprehensive and fully managed solutions, and providing these solutions along with the support that can always be trusted and relied upon. And lastly, we've created centres of excellence for 3 specialist areas. There's Independence at Home, which is the one that Kathy and I are working with. That's covering tech and monitoring solutions for both inside of the and outside of the individual home. Then there's Group Living for housing, sheltered schemes and extra care environments. And last but not least, there's hospitals and care homes. Each centre of excellence will have its own products, its own services, specialists and roadmaps, but they will also share a common transformational shift to digital and a goal to better support our customers and our partners. From a technology point of view, we've used an internal program called Elliot, it stands for Electrical Lagrange Internet of Things, to lead on the development of new UK and European digital standards. We've developed a white paper called Unleashing the Digital Premium, along with the GGI, Good Governance Institute. We've played an instrumental part in the Scottish Pathfinder and Test of Change projects. And our equipment and CMP, our cloud management portal, has been included in the Scottish Digital Telecare Security Test Suppliers Scheme, or Playbook for short. We are working in partnership with all of our customers throughout the UK to help them to plan their transition and realise the benefits of digital. And we've also used Elliot to create a digital ecosystem called TEO. TEO stands for Technology Always On. It consists of a digital hub connected to a digitally ready ARC, and in the middle we have the data well, that is the Lagrange cloud. Our digital home hubs are able to be installed with minimal and, if appropriate, no contact. They simply need plugging in before remote configuration via the cloud. And this plug and play digital home solution has proved transformational during COVID, but remains essential to the provision of a rapid care package to facilitate faster hospital discharge. And the TEO ecosystem extends to the furthest tip, which is traditionally a telecare peripheral. Always on, always communicating, sending and receiving fast, frequent and reliable data, advising whether working, whether powered, whether in range, and even whether being worn. Because if you've given someone a fall detector, you've done so for a reason. And if the fall detector has been taken off and left on the bedside cabinet, then you need to be proactively aware, because that knowledge will allow for one of two things: either an opportunity to reinforce the importance of wearing the device, or an opportunity to action plan B, because if the need remains, even if the initial solution wasn't suitable. And not being worn is just the start of what these collectors of data can achieve when it comes to proactive, preventative agenda and the creation of scalable, person-centered solutions. I'm going to play a quick video to give you a bit of a flavour of what TEO is all about, and then I'll come back and talk about a case study, the one I referred to at the start. So at the start of the presentation, I suggested that tech doesn't often fully succeed in isolation, and how a collaboration of partners working together with mutual goals is the best way to achieve shared positive outcomes. A perfect example of this is being employed in Tameside right now. Tameside is in Greater Manchester, the Northern powerhouse, and this case study is truly a best-in-class example of how multiple technologies and services can be employed by multiple departments with a single vision and a shared passion to improve the lives of multiple stakeholders. I do encourage you to take a look at the full case study and the associated video. It's about 13 minutes long, but it's well worth a watch. And both are available on our website, www.tinetech.co.uk. But in essence, it incorporates a blended approach to the use of technology. It mixes digital tech, including the fall detector that I've just shown, and medication dispensers and reminders. It also includes activities of daily living, telehealth, and a tablet-based remote clinical consultation to determine the need. And these remote engagements are the key to the success of the initiative. Clearly defined and designed questions delivered either over the phone or via a SIM-connected tablet, a clinical evaluation without the need for the clinician to be mobile, and to encourage the individual to take responsibility for their own health and well-being, to understand what support is required, and to use that knowledge to determine whether the tech solution currently in play should be scaled up or indeed scaled down in order to achieve the best outcomes. They've created the ability to age in place, and any survey that's ever been conducted shows that remaining at home despite the need for additional care is a key desirable, blending health, care, proactive insight with a reactive safety net. The community response team can signpost into health pathways, and health can refer into the community response team. And the outcomes are extremely positive for all of those stakeholders, from the services involved to the users and their friends and their family. In 2018, the service demonstrably prevented over 3,000 falls and reduced the need for over 2,500 ambulance journeys. And these savings are both personal and financial. And the service, of course, goes from strength to strength. Legrand Care has an ethos of working in collaboration with others. There are lots of examples like the Tameside case study on our website. And there's also a link to the white paper that I mentioned earlier, which I also encourage you to take a look at if you get a chance. We can offer free digital reviews, advice, experience, and lots of other resources, supporting you to develop and execute your digital journey, then being with you every step of the way as your trusted technology partner. And all because we're stronger together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for your presentation. Stuart will join us shortly on the panel session.
Thanks,
so thank you for the moment. So that's the end of our first part of today's event. So 3 presentations from EasyLink Your Meds and Legrand Care. So thank you to Mike and to Stuart for stepping in at the last moment. All those presentations will be available on our website. So for the second part of our session today, our event today, we'll have a panel discussion session. And I'd like to say thank you to Phil Bridges, and if Phil could join me now, from Oyster, for continuing to chair these events. Hi, Phil.
Hi.
Thank you for the questions that you have submitted so far. Please continue to do that. Now, I encourage you to do that during this next session. And if I could ask all panelists to start their videos. So, Bill, thank you very much. And I'd like to hand over to you to start the panel discussion. Thank you, Phil.
No problem. I was really expecting to say good afternoon, everyone, but it would appear that with a slight change to the program, we're actually going to start with a good morning, which is a pleasant change. So we scored a bit of extra time, which is nice. I'd just like to say, first of all, Christian from MediQuip, as I'm sure you're aware, was meant to be on this session. He actually has had to go out to a fall. So he's actually helping someone currently. So he is going to try and join us in the latter part of the call. if he can. But at the last minute, we've had literally James, who's just disappeared off screen. There he is, he's back. James Lampert from NRS has joined at the very, very last minute. So thank you, James, for that. Just as a bit of sort of housekeeping to start us off, questions would be really great. And I can see there's a number of people who are on this session. I've just had a look at who's attending, and I can see there are some really, really knowledgeable people out there who really probably are going to ask questions that I can't cope with, which is great. That's why there's a fabulous panel to help talk it through. But please do ping your questions in, and I've got a couple from Zach and from Bradley that we can throw in as we start. But we were just having a quick catch up before we came on the call, just before 11 o'clock, and we thought we'd probably start by starting with what the problem is currently. So some of the issues that we're facing today with falls, because obviously this is session 2. So in the previous session, we talked a little bit about some of the problems in terms of the quantity and the technology. I think this is more about looking at what the issue is now, and then starting to look at the roadmap and some of the different approaches, and how with a really experienced panel of people with OT background, nursing background, technology background, NHS, and obviously there's a mix of experience within within the panel. Let's see where we can take it. So I'm going to try and stop talking, but what would be great would be Aaron, just to start, between you and James, we were just talking before, and it'd be really good to drag out some of the bits that you were talking about the current issues. And maybe we can use that as a point to dive in, and then hopefully get some more questions as we move.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Phil. And thanks, Jerry and Terry, as well, for inviting me along today. Yeah, James brought up a really good point earlier in terms of what are the issues sort of at a topical nature. And at the moment, it seems to be felt, regardless of where you sit within the UK, whether you're in Wales, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, about ambulance service, the pressures being applied to ambulance service. And that's obviously to do with COVID, in terms of people waiting outside the hospital to be admitted safely in, which has a knock-on effect. Now, we know in Wales that falls is the #1 reason why someone over the age of 65 will call 999. And that obviously adds undue pressure to the ambulance service within Wales, and obviously across the rest of the United Kingdom. We were talking about some horror stories lately that are coming through where ambulance services are just flatly refusing to attend. And even if you have a response service, you're effectively downgraded, especially if that individual needs clinical assessment, which can't be provided from a responder who isn't clinically trained to a certain extent. So even if you have the response service, it's not necessarily the answer. So obviously we were discussing earlier on about the important role a response service plays. I know we've spoke about the tech this morning, and obviously the meds bit with Pretty, which was really fascinating. But it's good to kind of, as I mentioned on the last meeting a couple of months ago, tech will only ever be the enabling piece here. It's the services and the wraparound to that individual that you've got to get right. And response services, I'll just frame it because I always like throwing some data out there. But I may have thrown these figures up last time, but I recently left Cardiff Council after being there for 10 years. But I did a lot of work in the last couple of years in various roles in business analysts as well as project management about falls and the importance of a response service, because I think not enough is done to evaluate response services and their the way in which they kind of help mitigate falls, or at least respond to falls in a timely manner. So in Cardiff, for example, the average response time for a fall was 18 minutes, and that's for over 3,500 falls. So they're not small numbers. Roughly 10 to 12 falls per day. 85% of those people who fell in 2020 fell twice. So that repeat faller percentage we've noticed is starting to creep up and up. Used to be less than 50%, then it was 68% in 2019, now it's 80%. So people are living longer in their own home, which is a really good thing, but at the same time, they're falling more frequently. And there's an inevitability that fall 2, 3, or 4 is going to be, pretty serious to a certain extent, and not something a response service can help. Conveyance rates for a response service to ambulance, to ED, was 9%. It's 66% if a paramedic visits a property, if someone's fallen, that someone will be conveyed to the hospital in Cardiff. It's 9% if our response service goes. There's a big disparity there. You could argue the case that people will ring 999 because they're injured. I get that. So there will be a natural disparity between the figures, but 9% is really, really low. And I'd like to think a lot of that low conveyance rate is attributed to to that 18-minute response time, the reduction of a long life fall, as James was saying earlier, people on the floor for, for 7 hours. And we're hearing, that is obviously the kind of the norm at the moment. So I think, from that's the kind of the as is at the moment. And even with the response service, it's showing that it's really important. But we were looking at what the to be would be, the response service 2.0, how that kind of links back in. So I'll leave it there, and we can obviously, maybe kick that around a bit, but just wanted to frame the conversation with some facts and figures.
That's great, Aaron. James, do you want to just jump in there and just sort of fill in, colour that in a little bit with your...
Yeah. So just before you all joined us on the call today, I was saying, what we're going to talk about today. Then I was a last minute addition, and it was really just I guess some of the things that I'm currently seeing. I'm very close to kind of day-to-day operations. So I head up our technology-enabled care services across the UK. So we work with a number of different local authorities and NHS organisations. And one of the alarm receiver centres that we work with, particularly, is reporting lots of pressures, and there might be colleagues that might want to jump in on the chat and contribute to that. And examples where call centres are kind of almost falling foul of almost blame, really, where people are unfortunately falling and then having long lives because ambulance services, like Aaron says, are no longer able to go out and pick people up straight away. I was looking at a case this week where somebody fell in the middle of the night and waited 7 hours for an ambulance to tip up. Unfortunately, relatives couldn't be contacted. They didn't answer the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the poor person ended up having a long life before the ambulance did turn up. And these aren't just occasional stories now. I'm hearing these every week. So my question, I suppose, to throw out both to the panel and to people on the call, do participate in the chat window, was I guess, what do commissioners need to do? How can the tech industry support the this kind of wider system support, really? We're hearing loads of examples where home carers aren't available, and we're seeing recruitment problems. I know within the tech services, alarm receiving centres, certainly my service, and I'm sure that those others on the panel will also be experiencing staffing and recruitment issues. And winter, if you like, hasn't really started yet. So, certainly the conversation, I think, needs to go into what else we need to do around prevention, what we need to do around other care pathways, what other kind of support services need to be engaged with as part of this integrated approach to supporting people. So posture and stability classes, other tapping into voluntary sector organisations, just getting people to participate in active exercise and doing things that they can do to help themselves. It's a much wider and broader conversation than simply about the technology, which is great, but it's definitely an enabler. But there's lots of other things that are part of that mix.
Yeah, so thanks, James. So sitting on the thought of the scale of the problem. So yeah, I think this is really good because we're getting a really good picture of what the problem is. And I think as we walk through, I think we'll start to see the solutions building. I know, for instance, it was great on the previous call, and I think it's worth bringing these figures in again. Christian gave us the figures for 2021 for one of his contracts, where he had 12,661 activations from automated fall sensors, of which, when that was filtered down, 607 of them were actual events, of which 87 of those actually ended up in someone being transported to ED. So we can see that there's lots of inbuilt problems that are resting around the falls, and Pretty has very, very nicely painted the picture around that as well, of the effect of medication and all the pieces. So there are multiple pieces. I was just going to say, at this point, Tracy, is it good to draw you in with some of your experience as we're drawing the scale of the issue?
Yeah, and I think there's no getting away from the issues that are hitting everybody. I had an email from the RCN the other day as the nurse on the panel. There are now officially more people leaving the nursing register than are actually coming in. So where are the nurses going to come from? These extra however many thousand that the government have promised, and it's not just about nursing. It's right across the board. So I think we do have to look at things very differently now. And I think it is much more about keeping people well, being able to predict when things are going to happen. So I think that sort of, rather than the alarm response, which is absolutely vital and not decrying that at all, but I think we need to get cleverer around how we predict things that are going to happen. And certainly from Pretty's, picking up on some of Pretty's work, the medication bit is absolutely spot on, but it's more about keeping them well, encouraging the fluids, and making sure that that's all in place, so that we don't need the ambulances to be coming out, and using them for when we really do need them. So yeah, I think it's not an easy solution. I don't think anything we're going to solve in the next sort of 12-18 months. I think this is an ongoing thing that we're going to have to look at, because it's just massive.
Yeah, so it's great. What I'm going to do is I'm sort of going to draw in Stuart and Mike now for a second, because we're aware that we've got technology, but I wonder, having just discussed the scale, and I realise that you sit across multiple markets, I think it would be interesting to get your sort of slice, as it were, of what you've heard and what you see the issue as being from maybe from the technologist's perspective.
So from my point of view, obviously traditional telecare and even the fall detector that I described in my presentation, very reactionary. I still think that's vital. I think the prediction prevention element is absolutely key to the future, and I think digital will enable that. But having that underpinned by a reactionary safety net is very important, because engineering terminology, Murphy's law, if it can happen, it will happen. Regardless of how many times you try and prevent it, it will happen. So, you do need that reactionary safety net. I'd be interested to find out, with regards to the ambulance call outs, whether the individuals that rang 999 and then waited 7 hours for an ambulance or what have you actually had an alarm and did press a pendant, or one of the devices did actually activate, because then of course it would have been intercepted by an alarm receiving centre, and they would have determined whether to escalate to blue lights or to handle locally. Certainly the work and referencing the case study that I also put into the presentation, the key to that was they used the technology to prompt them to provide early intervention opportunities. The technology gave them a prompt to say, this person might need more. This person might need a clinical consultation. And of course, taking the point that Tracy made about not having enough nurses, what they did, because that need was expanding and the resource certainly wasn't in line with that need, then they used technology. They used a tablet that was taken to the individual in their home, and then they could have that clinical consultation without the clinician being mobile. So instead of spending half an hour in a car, driving to and fro people, you could still have that clinician consultation, but via a tablet that somebody else carried, and that somebody else was easier to come by than a fully trained nurse or a fully trained GP or what have you. So it's using technology, in such a way. We know the need is increasing. We know the resource, and certainly the budgets aren't increasing in line with those needs. So what can we do with the technology to provide early intervention opportunities, but then transformational ways of bringing that resource to bear and achieving those positive outcomes with it?
Well, I think technology is a brilliant tool, and definitely as we head into the future, it's going to provide numerous solutions to improve general way of life, not just healthcare. But there seems to be a fundamental problem at the moment, where we're creating the technologies that are able to monitor people's activities, but we haven't got the infrastructure all the resources to actually respond to what the technology's given us. And quite often, last night, for example, I was watching the news and Peterborough Council were on. And I was listening to a nurse who was saying that basically it was shortage of money and rising costs of care, rising demand for social care. They just haven't got the funds. So all our technology is heading in a fantastic way. But if someone's not able to respond to it, I think we're missing something. And what I'm concerned about is the poor person that has had a fall. If they have a partner with them, they have a bit of comfort. Many, usually the women outlive the men, and usually they find themselves on their own. So if this poor person's had a fall, fantastic, our technology has predicted it, and the resources aren't there to send assistance, then maybe we should consider the cost of ambulance and fully trained professionals, and maybe look at, there's dozens of local charities and volunteers in every town. And I think that a network of responders could be created where people simply turn up, and if they've got access to the building through a key code or whatever, they can actually establish if the woman or person is seriously hurt, maybe go in, offer them comfort. If it is a serious case, it could be prioritized, because other than installing cameras everywhere, we can't tell how serious the person's condition could be. And if we get there sooner, then the person is more likely to survive and the care costs are reduced. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So right. So there's a loads of interesting points there, and I'm sure we're going to jump onto each one of those as we move through as well. I just wanted to pick up on the fact that William just put a question in there about the number of that were directed at Aaron around the number of with the falls in Cardiff. And actually, Aaron, your response to it, which is on the chat, by the way, so if you're watching the chat, there is a little bit of chat going on as well in the background. That actually sings to something that came in as a question pre the event as well. So I'm going to come back to where we were, but I just want to pull this in at this point. One of the questions was from Bradley in Sutton and Kingston about whether or not we're sharing our falls data with health. And then Aaron, at that point, do you want to just say what your response, which I thought was very telling?
We do share our full reporting with health. So I was invited along to sit on the falls delivery group within Cardiff and the Vale University Health Board. So 7 health boards in Wales. Obviously, I used to work within Cardiff Council, so that I would go there. And I think the data did really sort of capture the imagination, as I was invited back to sit on the steering group, and now I sit on the National Task Force. So they do take it seriously, but we're the only ones in Wales that have managed to kind of give some sort of element of community-based recording when it comes to falls. There's a lot of ED stuff that's there, but my argument with that is sometimes it might not be categorized as a fall, for example. Someone might come in with a concussed head, lacerated head or something like that. It might not be to do with it was a fall, but they're being categorized as head injury. So it doesn't go down on the fall stats. So, and health by their own admission admit that they've kind of got it wrong in that regard. The only, I can hang my hat on our stats in Cardiff as being kind of 99.9% accurate because we've got eyes on. So as you were saying earlier about Christian's, kind of the falls, the detector stats that threw up that, 600 activations of 12,000 were actual falls. Well, yeah, it's very hard to rely on the technology, and it's very hard to rely on the person as well, because stiff upper lip, as Mike was saying earlier, they don't necessarily want help or support, so they kind of keep it hidden to a certain extent. And we did notice that I think it was 9% of our falls in 2020, sorry. The faller didn't tell anyone other than Telecare about the fall as well. So you've still got that kind of, I don't want to tell family, and you can't really force that upon them, other than the fact that you should educate them that telling people about falls is good don't be tarred with that stigma brush. So yeah, I think it is the stats, kind of go back to the original question, they are sort of disseminated out to health. It's just whether they take them seriously. Because someone from health did say to me, well, people are living longer in their own home. It's not that much of a problem. I'm thinking, oh, what a very narrow-minded thing of, very narrow-minded way of saying that. Because ultimately it is our kind of bread and butter within the telecare space falls that they always have been. And the fact that we've got a response service means that we can get really kind of accurate figures in terms of reduction in conveyance rates, etc. And we worked out an annual saving or avoidance cost, for the Welsh Ambulance Service. It's roughly £700,000 per annum per financial year. So it's not a small number. And ultimately that is a health saving. It's not a social care saving, even though we're funded by social care. So it's kind of that kind of pooled resource. And as Mike was saying, then a connected kind of mesh of partnerships and collaboration should be how we drive this forward, because you've got local authority as we are in Cardiff responding to the fall, but it's the knock-on effects then. It's preventing that, as I said, 85% frequent fall rate, trying to get that number down to a more manageable figure. The only way you're going to do that is by dynamically risk assessing the property, medication reminders and reviews, getting your eyesight checked. 56% of fallers last year in Cardiff hadn't had their eyes tested for 2 years. 67% of them were wearing slippers when they fell. So we've gone really kind of holistic with the data to look at the kind of the whole body and the whole sort of environment, which is quite fascinating. But go back to the original question. There's not those sort of formal links back into the health board, but in my new role with the NHS, there will be. So watch this space.
I just to pick up on that, I think that's really refreshing, because I think that's again is the other issue, is those two silos, it's health and social care, and they're just until we can actually mesh those two together, I think that's going to be part of the answer.
Absolutely, and we can see the fact that that's one of the directions of travel that we are as a country supposedly looking at. And I use supposedly because I think the reality is that on this call today there's probably 80 people listening to this, and it is the same 80 people that really understand the problem, who really want to change it. So I think there's probably a piece in there as well, and I sit here, chairing it as someone who makes technology that has full sensing on it, that is trying to push an agenda probably about making people more active, giving people confidence to go beyond their four walls. So I'm absolutely sold into this. But is there a piece? It's been really great for me to hear Pretty talking, and on the previous call as well, from your meds, about the fact that that medication piece, I didn't have that in my canon ready for that discussion. So actually, how do we change this as well? And I guess this is a bigger question, it's probably a UK telehealthcare question, and Jerry, I'm sure, will jump on this right at the end, is that the education, we've got to stop necessarily educating the same people who are already educated. What we've got to do is we've got to catch social workers at university, and we've got to start catching nurses at the earliest stage, so they understand the knock-on effect. Because actually, so maybe that's the next. Again, I've done my usual thing of just drifted on some little rant of my own about how I want to change the world. Welcome to your 50s, Phil. That's what it does to you. But so does someone want to come in and maybe talk about that beginning of that journey and what that future piece should look like? Oh, I'll make that as a no.
So I've joined the Yorkshire AHSN Propel programme, which is hopefully going to give me some insight into how the NHS works, and then also bring in their social care colleagues. And one of my objectives of that programme is to join up that conversation between health and social care about medication and why it's so important. So until we do that, and with the ICSs, I think we have an opportunity, but we need to bring everyone around the table and almost go, let's start with this blank piece of paper, because actually hospital discharge is really messed up. You've got social care teams running around trying to support medication, but actually you could sort it out at the hospital so they leave with the right meds and then can have that in their home with them. Or we could even get them working with the system in the hospital. So hospitals for me are counterintuitive. We take people who are fairly independent in their homes and then get them into hospital and then don't let them move. We don't let them cook. We don't let them, take control of their medication. We monitor when they go to the bathroom. It's nonsense. They should be more like hotels where people can still be independent and get better in a supported way. So that then the jump from going from hospital back into your home isn't such a massive jump. And so with my medication hat on, I'm just kind of saying, let's bring that conversation and just open up the opportunities. And what could we do if we had a blank piece of paper? Why are we so afraid of this blank piece of paper? Because some bits of the system is so broken, it's just really not fit for purpose.
That's a big statement. At that point, Jerry appears with his hand up.
Thank you, Phil. I was too busy tweeting when you asked the question about education. But here I am. So a really good point, Phil, in terms of education and where we want to be with this as well. So we have been working, as you know, we had a session on education and training, and we're going to continue with this. And one of the sessions we have planned for January 2022 is purely around education. So we're working with Disabled Living Foundation, who are doing a lot of work in terms of not only gathering information about what equipment's available so that assessors can actually go through programs that will lead them to having the right assessment, but also providing a number of training courses. And part of their trusted assessor courses, they have a module which is purely around the implementation of telecare. So they will be presenting all that stream of training at our January event. But we're also looking at the I suppose the top-down approach as well in terms of commissioning and purchasing of equipment. And we're working with the University of Cumbria, who've just put out their new postgrad course in digital health, and they will also be presenting there as well. So we want to cover that whole spectrum of training going forward. And we think, everyone should be involved, from assessors, from enablement teams. We know that the OTs are fully involved, but we need to have that embedded earlier in their training. So we fully support that and on the training side. And while I have the floor, I'd like to raise a question on a slightly different subject, which is around funding, and maybe start with Stuart, because in your presentation, Stuart, you talk about the collaboration between housing, social care and health in your Teesside project. But my question is there that collaboration? Is there that joined up funding yet that makes that collaboration work? Or do we need to put some more work into that by driving this forward with NHSX, NHS Digital, NHS England and others?
Yeah, I don't think the budgets are fully aligned, but there's certainly a shared budget in this particular example that I've mentioned, and I think it is key, having a shared budget. I think Erin mentioned, funded by social care, but the savings are from a health perspective, and I think Tracy mentioned silos, and very much that has been the status quo for as long as I can remember. I think, having shared budgets is part of the problem. But I think most importantly, it's shared ownership. It's a joint passion and a shared vision and goal between health and social care that wins out. In the particular example I've used, it was nurse led, which is interesting. So it's not GP led. It's not health as in NHS X led, it's nurse led, and very much the nurse element was almost the link between the NHS and the community response service. And I think maybe there is a bit of work that can be done nationally in that respect to almost join the dots, but not take a direct approach, but go through the nurses in order to get to where you need to be. So I'm doing a Phil now and I'm rambling. It is an over 50s thing, Phil. So I think the most important thing, budget is important, but most importantly, shared passion, shared goal, shared vision, and shared ownership is what will win out at the end of the day. Because there's no doubt about it. There is elements to be played from a technological point of view. There's elements to be played from a health point of view, and there's elements to be played from a community response point of view. And only when that collaboration is working, and most importantly, human beings are communicating, does it work.
That is right. So if you were going to put what the problem is and what the potential solution is, it literally is that, Stuart, for me, is that, I find it fascinating that we've got a group of people on here who are in complete alignment, actually, probably. I don't think any of us, despite being from potentially competing organizations or from completely different backgrounds, are seeing the problem differently. I think we can all see that it's a massive problem. We can all see that it's multifaceted. We've got some great data being fed in, which I think really helps. I think the budget part is definitely something that needs to be, dragged out. But I think the biggest part is actually, why are we not being engaged? Why are we always trying to pull to get this sorted? Where is the overarching piece that sits there? Or what should that overarching piece be? What, is it all parliamentary groups? Is it what's missing that we need to make happen to actually? Let's be completely clear about this. We are, we've got nursing background, we've got OT background, we've got medical, we've got technologists. All of these people sitting here on the call, and we're all driven to do the same thing. And we've all got technologies or different pieces that could work. What's the piece that's missing? Because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to challenge Jerry at the end of it to go and fix it. So maybe James, where do you see that being? So I can just catch up on some of the messages coming in.
Yeah. There's a range of different things I think that need to be done. I think people might be familiar with the report which was done. I know UKTelehealthcare had some input as well earlier in the year. The ADAS report with the TSA as well, which came up with a range of recommendations talking about what the tech sector needs to do and what the local authorities and the NHS need to do in order to help kind of drive this agenda forward. And there's quite a good strategic blueprint which the TSA have been involved with developing, which sets out a whole number of different strands. I've revisited it again this week, and it's not the sort of thing that you can do all at once. You have to kind of pick and choose, and different organisations need to pick and choose the things which they need to do and can deliver on. And one of the key themes in all of this is around organisations working together. And that's what you have to do when you're working around some of these issues which are so complicated. So that's my take on it. Really, it's not a quick win, but certainly there are some tools out there now which we've got access to, which we should all be having a good look at. They're also developing a sort of digital maturity matrix, which one of the special interest groups has been working on, and again certainly kind of look at that in the course of the next few months, coming out certainly by the time they get to conference in the springtime, and that should be available. And then just sort of reflecting back on some of the earlier conversations, I guess just in relation to education, certainly it's something, again, it's my view on this is actually let's just get on and do some things. So for us organisationally, a bit like others on the panel, is around engaging with those higher education institutions. So we've got connections with a number of universities local to some of our services. We've taken occupational therapy students in the past. We've got some more lined up for just after Christmas, I think from Brighton and Cambridge Christchurch University. And if it's all right with Terence as well, we've one of the occupational therapy students who spent some time with us earlier this year has actually chosen to look at tech as part of her dissertation. And so that she obviously found something inspired there. She's trying to reach out and find occupational therapists who have worked with people with early stage dementia, and is looking for them to complete a 15-minute survey. So if we can possibly get the link out to that after the event, that would be really helpful. She's struggling to find them at the moment, so that would be great. And I'm sure she'd be more than happy to share some of the findings back with us and the wider community. Hopefully, it's not something that will sit on the shelf, that she discovers some great things and then none of the rest of us know about it. Yeah. So I know you're going to pick up some questions, Bill. I'm happy to come in on the best interest question there later if you want me to as well.
Well, actually, that was literally the one that I thought was so just coming from Deborah around the fact that I suppose we're starting to move towards what the roadmap looks like, and a lot of the roadmap we're moving towards the Internet of Things, and I know from an Oyster perspective that's entirely our direction of travel as well, which is about trying to build this bigger picture of someone's life, so we can start to look at the preventative and proactive technologies. And I know that Stuart and Mike will absolutely be sitting on the same bed, and I know James has been an advocate for it for years, and again with Tracy. So what I think is it would be good to start to talk about what that looks like, and Deborah's point is the fact that we are going to start monitoring people's lives. We are going to be looking for insights and looking for warnings rather than being an alarms driven industry, because picking people up from the bottom of the waterfall is never the answer. The answer is to walk upstream and stop people getting in the river. Thank you, Deb from NRS, for giving me that a number of years ago as a statement. So let's talk about the issues around that. So let's start with the issues and then potentially start to talk about what the potential benefits could be, because I think it's worthy of looking at risk versus reward. And I say that in the knowledge of the fact that I saw a great statistic talking about cycling, is the fact that the cycle helmet statistically is terrible because it stops more people riding. So the better health comes of people riding. So in countries where they don't have helmets, people get on their bike and they just poodle along. But because the cycle helmet makes you look like a bit of an idiot, people don't ride in the UK because it's regarded as being not right to ride in the UK without a cycle helmet. So I think it's about looking at risk and reward within all of this as well. So I just wanted to position that because it's just my random fact of the day. So let's talk about the risks of data.
I think the weather might have something to do with it as well, Phil.
Sorry?
The weather might have something to do with it as well.
It's glorious in Dover, Stuart, always.
I'd like to say in California it was great, but I'm not really in California.
Fabulous. Aaron, come on, bring us back online with some thoughts on the data side of things and what that looks like.
So the data side is interesting, isn't it? Because telecare historically has been quite reactive and passive in a sense, or so it sits there and you activate it when you need to. And local authorities or housing, anyone involved in telecare services, because it is very local authority laden in Wales. So I always say local authorities, but local authorities housing anyone involved, local telecare services have set their services up in terms of the workforce structure to be reactive to that. So when you start adding on reams and reams of data in terms of activities of daily living, which can, obviously the likes of just checking a canary, for example, that are, somewhat specific to reablement, or that's where I think they sit better in terms of care planning. When you start sort of exploring that and the mass consumables, when you're looking at well-being metrics such as pedometry, for example, and sleep pattern, who is going to interpret that data as well? And also we're seeing sort of, closer links back in with telehealth. So if you're looking at falls with specific health conditions, chronic health condition, who's going to monitor that? A telecare operator who isn't trained as a clinician. So there's got to be a way in terms of aggregating the data so that it's relevant. And at the same time, you need your back-end signposting mechanisms in place. I'll just give you a brief example of a project that I led with Armed last week. So we were the first in Wales to launch it. Granted, we only did 20 devices because we just didn't have the workforce to be able to cope. And, me being an idiot, decided to launch it right at the start of the first national lockdown in March 2020. So I never like doing things by half. So we got 20 out in the field. But what we liked about Armed was that the information was aggregated in the cloud, in the Azure cloud, and then it was dumped on my platform and just as a simple RAG status. So I knew red equals bad. And if I wanted to drill down further into the data, there was an intuitive dashboard, which was built on a Power BI kind of setup. So I could, if I was being nosy, go and look at the sleep pattern of that individual, if that was the reason for the deviation in normal data, and have a conversation, a personal conversation with that individual about why they weren't getting much sleep and why they're getting up at night, and, et cetera, et cetera. So, but again, if your workforce is set up to be reactive, and anyone who's gone through a workforce restructure in local authority will feel my pain in terms of how hard that is, in terms of the issues of voluntary severance and this, that, and the other, and renegotiating contracts. You're never going to be able to spread and scale those really good, and I'm using ARMD as an example, but ARMD could be one of 1,000 new products that come to the market that look at more of the kind of the preventative stuff and the predictive stuff, which is the really important, which is really juicy. You're never going to be able to spread and scale it appropriately because you don't have the workforce to be able to cope with the increased demand. So it's not just, what do you do when the data tells you this person's in a state of crisis or about to be in a state of crisis? It's the preempt to that, which is all of the data that's coming through and how you store it. I mean, it isn't going to link with existing ARCs at the moment, especially the analog ARCs. So there's a lot of wider discussion about when you procure your alarm receiving center for the digital migration, that you have a focus on the back end APIs about, will it talk to third-party applications? That needs to be a prerequisite in any RFP when you're going out to tender and things like that. So from a tech company perspective, I didn't really want to go on about much about what we're actually up to at the minute, because we're very sort of at foundation level at the minute in terms of just devising our blueprint and our raison d'etre for the next sort of 5 years for the programme in Wales. But we will help facilitate with RFPs and things like that for local authorities that are planning on changing their alarm receiving centre software, because we see that as being crucial. Get the infrastructure right in the first place, and then the tech will naturally follow suit thereafter. I think we get bogged down, or I used to. I BDIs when I see the latest fall detector that looked a bit more snazzy than a pendant. But it's very tricky to get that linkage back in. The infrastructure's got to be right. So data comes from infrastructure, comes from workforce, comes from collaboration as well into health if the local authorities aren't capable of doing it. So sorry, long answer short that was, Phil, but data, you could have a whole session on data, couldn't you? And I don't think you get as many attending, if I'm honest, because it's very dry, but
yeah, no, I mean, literally you can see people falling asleep while they're listening to it, but that's great.
It's me though.
No, it's not you, because I actually think it is genuinely interesting. Stuart, you got your hand up. I didn't want to leave you hanging there.
No, well, I only put my hand up to try and stop Aaron from because he was putting people to sleep, you see. So
well, that's it. I'm coming for Legrand next.
No, I absolutely agree with what Aaron was saying. So I think, from a technological point of view, again, and I always come at it from the tech point of view. Clearly, there is a transition from analog to digital, and with that transition comes from reactionary to predictive, preventative. And the devices that we have, that we wear, that we can put in the home, telecare, is also moving to become data collectors. They will collect data and they will send that data into the cloud, and that data in the cloud will be interpreted by an AI or machine learning, and it will dump RAG status onto somebody's PC. But then what do they do with that information? And depending on whose PC it's dumped onto, do they have the kind of clinical training, clinical understanding to do that drilling down to determine, what the need actually is, and then have the pathways in place to enable them to pick up the phone and make that change happen. And I think that's the disconnect. That's the disconnect between, where we are in the tech space to where health is. And almost that's the bit that we need to invent. That's the bit that needs to be, that needs to be the community response team, the tech team need to be able to take that information, that prompt, that early intervention opportunity, that red or amber, and tell somebody about it, and then be able to action it. And them actioning it will be the preventative. It won't be that the tech has prevented it, because all the tech has done is highlighted that there is a risk. And it's what somebody does with that risk in order to mitigate it that's important.
Absolutely. Tracy, sorry, I just were you about to jump in then?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you there, Stuart. Sort of again with my nurse's hat on and working with a lot of clinicians on the telehealth side of things. We don't have a response centre. It's down to the nurses in GP practices. It might be community nursing teams that are actually looking at the data. And I think it's great. Technology, I'm of an age where technology was, I was like, with my lamp and my owl in my pocket when I trained, but there are still a lot of clinicians out there that, when you're looking at telehealth, that are very reticent to take on the responsibility of doing this. And it's such a different way of working. And I think that's the bit that we've got to get over, is that, it's not the same. It is different. You are still responsible for your patients. You are still responsible for their care. But a lot of these patients that, the telecare side and telehealth is so interlinked now. But it's that monitoring bit and who's responsible. And I think from a clinical point of view, that's where a lot of clinicians get a bit scared, because they always think it's down to them and nobody else. And we've got to sort of bridge that gap and make sure that they do feel safe to use the technology and act upon the results that would prevent them from falling. It's everything's just so intertwined that, it's going to be really difficult to unpick that. But I think it does go back again. We've already talked about education. And I think, I hear it all the time from nurses, and I can say it because I'm one myself. I didn't come into nursing to do technology. And I'm like, yeah, I bet you all book your holidays online. And it's, what is the difference, other than the fact that you've got a patient at the end of that whose life might depend on it, but yeah, it's a bit of a long journey, I think.
Thanks, Tracy. James, do you want to just come in there?
You're on mute.
Should have learned that by now, shouldn't I? I was just going to say, like Tracy, I was going to agree with everything that Stuart said. Really, just as an example, I'm working on a project at the moment, working with an integrated care system, which for me is just fun, because you've got staff that are equally caring about working in an integrated care system. There's an integrated director for the area who's equally concerned about health and social care. So lots of the conversations and actually getting the right people around the table is just a pleasure. And actually we can have some quite fast moving conversations about what to do, get decisions made. And I think the two things which potentially are barriers is around, one, the information governance and data protection and sharing, which kind of goes back to some of the comments I think in the chat box, is how do you get consent, whose data is it, who can share it, what do you do with it, what do you do if people lack capacity, what do you do with people who do have capacity, and all that stuff. So that's one thing. And I think to get some data sharing agreements in place between organisations pretty quickly, or make sure you've got information governance folk around the table having those conversations, just means you can cut through a lot of time delay, to be honest. Is one thing. And the second thing there, which goes back to what you were saying there, Tracy, was around clinical governance, and having some really clear, just making sure that everybody understands what governance process you're using within those organisations. Because again, if you can get those right people that are responsible for making decisions on board with it and understanding it, then you can cut through a lot of these conversations, I think, and just understand where the risk sits and who's agreeing what. So yeah, those are two quite big and probably quite dull things, but actually, if you're going to deliver these things at scale, are quite important.
Absolutely. I mean, what I want to say at this point, though, is Stuart, I don't agree with you, because that was getting a little bit too Stuart-centric for a second. Apart from the fact that I obviously do. I think that there's a couple of really interesting bits that sit with this that I'd just like to pull out. I think Digital Scotland, I know you mentioned them, Stuart, in your presentation, I think have done a lot of work about looking at this middle piece, this data integrator part, that I think is going to become more prevalent, because I think the model of a reactive alarm and a reactive arc. And I know that there are arcs. I mean, I know Richard's on this call from Hawkeye, who wants to do it differently and not be so reactive, wants to be more about looking at the warnings and insights. So I think there's an appetite. I think what's not happening is potentially it's not being made clear that all of this stuff is up for grabs. And I think that there's, there needs to be more of an industry pull. I think that's a challenge for Jerry on the call. Because I think actually, if we were to unpick everything that's been said in the last two sessions, I think it's all been about a substantial problem, that there are multiple, it's multifaceted in terms of the solution. You've got, you've got the biggest players on the market, you've got disruptors, you've got organizations that are desperate to try and solve this. No one is looking to break this system. We're all looking to make it in some way work. So I think maybe that's the piece to, sort of in a summing up piece, is how do each of us see the fact that, what should the next stage be? There seems to be an agreement of interoperability. There seems to be an agreement of a desire to work towards a better outcome. What should that look like? Pretty, I'm going to throw to you straight away.
So when I joined Your Meds, that's the first thing I did, was went and talked to everybody I could to sort of say, you need the Meds piece into your system. And we're happy to have that open API and push the data into there. And actually, the amount of data, I think, is probably one of the biggest issues, is that you're collecting a lot of noise. So it's quite hard to distill what's important. So when we start working with the council, they'll say, oh, we want to know everything. And we actually advise them that actually you only really need to know when the wrong ones are taken and when multiple wrongs are taken, because that's the important bit. If they've missed it or they were a little bit late, that probably isn't an issue. But with the work that we're doing next year, we'll be able to risk rate every single pod to say that one, if you miss that one, that's kind of important. So we know that we need to do an intervention on that. So we have the computing technology, we have everything at our fingertips, but I think we're just collecting too much noise, and it's trying to pull out what's important out of everything that everyone's doing and say, that's what we need to react to.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So Mike, what are your thoughts? I always like to get your thoughts.
Well, as you can tell, I've been sitting here listening intently, making loads of notes. And I'd like to go back to the policy of education. I've mentioned this before. It's people are hesitant of change. And we've got a big change on the way with trying to convince people to accept technology. Now, you've only got to look at the Amazon Alexa, and you have a handful of people that love it to death, and then you have a handful of people that will say, I'm not having one of them in my house. It's always listening to me. It's always doing this. It's always doing that. But we need a long-term policy of education. And I think it should start at school and maybe even be part of the syllabus, where children are actually taught the benefits of assistive technologies and given some insight into what their grandparents may be looking forward to in the next few years, because everyone says these days, oh, I don't get my phone, I'm going to give it to my granddaughter, I'm going to give it to my grandson. They listen to them. They don't listen to their kids. Like my son, my daughters, I know nothing. I know nothing. But grandchildren, you tend to listen to, because I don't know. It's just a kind of more of a direct connection by cutting out the middlemen. If you catch that. So I think if there was a policy of education where children are actually taught at school about technologies, and that then is passed on. We're not talking a short-term project. because we can analyze all the data we want. We're going to end up with the same outcome because we're just going to be able to identify more positively what we already know. And until we can actually respond to the outcomes of that data, then we are making an improvement, but not one that is radically going to improve healthcare for the individual. It's all concentrating on the service and managing resources. So it is about education. And there are already universities that have assistive technologies as part of the syllabus. In fact, our grant will be doing a product training session at Worcester University next month, where there's 48 students who are going to learn our side of assistive technology, which is off the shelf, throw it in there, that's an instant solution. But they'll also learn about some of the connectivity options. So it's already there. This policy of education is already there. But I think it needs to start. You mentioned about you need to walk further back up the stream. That's where it makes sense. That's what I was thinking about. It really needs to start educating people now, because unless we can convince people, like ourselves, we're the next generation of oldies that may fall, may develop serious health conditions. I've already had a new hip, new shoulder, all the rest of it, and God knows what else is coming along the way. But until people are ready to accept that technology, and it was a message from Deborah that I was looking at with people that are they going to find this intrusive, and are we sort of targeting people when it's almost too late? We've identified people that have got health conditions, or they've got diseases, or they may be falling, they may have ongoing health problems. But what about all the people that could be heading that way that we're not focusing on, because that's prevention?
Yeah, for sure.
When we get to the stage where we're monitoring people that already have something that's not right, it's
we're joining the journey too late. Yeah, absolutely.
There's my son is always referencing data and metrics and performance of various things. And I always break it down into a simplistic view in the way that I can understand it, because I was never good at the digital side of electronics. And when you start learning, or you appreciate what can come out of analyzing data, providing it's valuable data, then there is definitely something to work with. But it does need a bit more focus and I think a clearer direction of what we're going to end up with at the end of it.
Yeah,
because it just seems like we're working towards sort of defining what we already know.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a point to come back to. I'm just going to really quickly just work around, because we've got a couple of minutes before we want to throw to Jerry. Aaron, any final thoughts about direction?
Yeah, four points, Phil, I'll rattle through. So response services 2.0. So I'm just thinking about kind of like, not just, focusing on lifting, as I mentioned earlier, but linkage back into domiciliary care and personal care services, the ability to do them themselves as well, which we've seen in the likes of Delta Wellbeing and Rhondda and Taff in Wales. Helping with hospital discharge, for example, as well. So being present on the wards as well, to try and prevent that kind of readmission, going into the home and doing those dynamic risk assessments, supplemented by a tech package that underpins all of that. Second point is the upgrade of alarm receiving centres to digital, focusing on interoperability, because you'll have a lot better chance to capture more meaningful data and be more preventative, as Mike was saying then, make the data more meaningful, because it will drive a lower sort of age demographic, because we're seeing a lot of people in the telecare space being aged 85 plus. It's roughly 32% of everyone in Cardiff over age 85 comes through the telecare. It's 2% if you're between 65 and 74. So there's very much that reactive shift there. We're targeting people who are elderly, because that's the way the technology is marketed towards, and the way services are marketed towards, because they're focusing on reactivity. Third point is a workforce restructure, as I mentioned earlier, but a full review of stakeholder engagement. So almost like an information architecture, but a workforce architecture, so if that's a word. So structuring kind of the wider sort of partnership and collaboration arrangements that would be involved in that, because it can't just be local authorities with 3 or 4 operators sitting there answering calls. It's got to grow, and it's got to be more meaningful. It's got to touch other areas of interested stakeholders, whether that's health, with primary care, secondary care, for example, or whether it's back into third sector organisations, for example, the Red Cross, who are doing a lot of good work in response services within Wales. And lastly is a national data set. So that's something that we're going to be working on in Wales within the part of the telecare programme, is establishing meaningful data sets across all of the telecare services, trying to link them back into the local health boards. That's it from me.
Thanks, Aaron. Tracy, would you like to just sum up?
Yes, and yes to what Aaron's just said, basically.
I like it when it goes like that, Tracy. That works for me.
Yeah, we just need to sort of think cleverer, I think, really. Well, is it cleverer? It's probably more simple, actually. We just need to know, we need to state what it is that we want and do it, in effect.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. James, just a final word. I'm Stuart as well. I'll come to you.
I guess it's just picking up maybe on a couple of the points there that haven't been revisited, was really just around education. And there's still 33 people on the call, and if we and the panel members all go off and speak to our local universities and make an offer, then we can start to get it on the agenda there with health and social care professionals. I talk regularly with Canterbury Christchurch University. I did a session a couple of weeks ago for third year students. So not only taking students, but actually get yourself a slot and talk about how it's relevant to practice. I've had an invitation as well from a nurse at Nottingham University who said, actually, do you know what? The stuff you're doing would be really interesting to our nurse cohort. So I think it's just getting that awareness and looking for those opportunities. And the second point was really just a reminder for people to go back and have a look at the TSA and ADAS report that came out earlier in the year. It does tell you what to do in terms of direction of travel, and the focus is around integrated working. So those points from me.
Thanks, James. Stuart, final word, because I know Jerry's desperate to stop me talking.
But my final word is to give Jerry some tasks, as you quite rightly mentioned earlier on, Phil. So, I mean, what we've all agreed, I think, is that different organisations, collaborative working, everybody has a part to play. People need to communicate. People need to have mutual goals. We've all agreed on that throughout this morning. I think, the salesperson's approach is always to engage at every level, to understand what those barriers are, and then to remove those barriers, because if you do so, then obviously it smooths the road for what's coming. I think Aaron's data is the game changer. Tech going digital will produce data that is, it's not ambiguous, it's not open to interpretation, it's clear, understandable, RAG status data that basically says, here is the value to you and your organization. And if we can then present that to those individuals and say, here's the whiff, here's what's in it for you, and if we can show that demonstrably, this will improve if you participate, then I think that's the game changer. So I think the most important thing Jerry needs to do is almost bring those organizations together and allow that data to be shared and allow those conversations to take place.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. So that's it. Education, response. We're getting people too late. Digital is the opportunity, and actually the fact that everyone has a desire to make this happen. So actually, anyone who's listening, if they're doing anything, make contact with Jerry, and that we can pull all the pieces together and actually make this happen. That would be a great outcome from a combined 2 Falls sessions. And I will now stop talking. Thanks, everyone. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. It's great, isn't it, when you come away from a session like this with more work than you had when you started. So everyone's assigned me something. So thank you very much. But no, absolutely right, though. What I don't want these sessions to be is talking shops where we start and stop within a 2-hour period. What we've tried to do is build on something, and what I can see is these sessions, whether it's on falls, whether it's on all IP, whether it's on education, we're joining some of those dots now, and we're building on some of those things to move us forward. The highlights from today, and thank you again to all the panel, to Aaron, Pretty, Tracy, Mike, Stuart and James for coming in late. James, thank you very much. The highlights for me today, Mike, really, you took us back to basics, didn't you? And talking about this golden hour. You know, I've been in this industry for 25 odd years, and we've always, in terms of forward, been talking about the golden hour and how important it is that we can be as proactive as we want, but at the end of the day, we've got to get people as soon as they fall, and that cuts down the period in terms of the recovery. So how important is that? And we really need to do is concentrate on that. And also, Mike talked about assessment as well, and his assessment form. And we know from experience now that we just can't throw technology at people. We've got to look at that person-centric assessment first before we do anything. But also, and I know I say this quite a lot, because we need to go back to it because people's conditions change. So reassessment is as important. Pretty took us down the road of data analytics and data-driven decisions. So it's not all about medication reminders, is what we get back in terms of data from that. And that was something that was built on by some of the comments that Stuart made as well. And Stuart talked about one of the big advantages of digital, and that's always on. And I think that's important. There's this opportunity. Digital is a challenge, but there's a huge opportunity around a system that's always on. That again takes us back to what Aaron was saying about the importance of data and that data analytics and those algorithms that sit behind it for us to be able to not only look at individuals, but communities as well going forward. And that's something we really want to support. And the big thing that came out for me from the end of this really is that I think the last fall's forum we ran went very much along the lines of let's look at prevention as well. But there's a balance, isn't there? Because we talked about the issues around blue lights and responses and how difficult that is. So we've got to find the balance between both things. Prevention, really important. And if we can stop people falling, great. But when people do fall, we've got to have the response in place as well. And I think that leads us into the future events as well. So again, thank you very much to the panel and Phil for organising that. I'd just like to give you some future events and really see how this all ties into what we're trying to achieve. So our next event is on the 30th of November, so next Tuesday, and we go back to revisit, but in a slightly different way, the all IP situation. So the last all IP events we ran were very much around the technology of it, and we had some really good technical experts. In this event, we want to look much more at the strategies. So we have Michael Sawfield from NHSX, who's the Social Care Connectivity Manager. We've got Richard Parkinson from Farpoint, who's done some research and surveys around the tech industry and the digital switchover, and he'll be feeding back on that. And I'm really pleased that Sarah Shepherd, who's the head of digital phone switchover for Tech UK, will also be joining that panel. The panel will also be joined by Max Stevens, giving us a view from the SIM card side of it, the mobile data side of it, and by popular demand, Stuart's back on that panel as well. We also have 3 presentations, innovation presentations on that event. And we have Carl Ryan from Essence, John East from Apello, and Richard Bailey from Telealarm, and they will all be on the panel as well. So really mixed panel there, but really to start drilling down, not on just the technology, but on the strategy side of that as well. In terms of future events, what we want to do is keep the momentum going. We have the demand for these events, so we've planned right into next year. So in January, as I said earlier, spurred on by Phil's question, training and education. And although we've got speakers, as I said, from Disabled Living Foundations and University of Cumbria, and there will be others, any suggestions the panel or the delegates on today might have, please let me know, and we're really happy to include that. So that's 18th of January, training and education. And then on the 1st of February, really interesting that we thought about this, and we had so much to talk about this today. We're going to look at text and blue lights. So we're really engaged with police, fire, ambulance, etc. So anyone from those sectors who's on the call, and we know we get many of people from those areas, do get in touch if you want to be part of that, want to be part of the panel. Because I think what we highlighted today but falls, but it covers across the board, particularly post-lockdown, or there may be more lockdowns, but how the text industry supports the blue lights as well. So we're really looking forward to that. And finally, our first live event is now planned for the 15th of March. And really thanks to Mo Valley Life for volunteering the venue for that, which is Dorking Halls in Dorking. If you're a member and you haven't booked your stand yet, please do that. If you're a non-member but you're interested in having a stand there, please contact me. All the contact details are on the website. And we're looking at making this a really interactive marketplace. We're going to go away completely from having breakout sessions with lots of PowerPoints. We want people in a room talking to each other, moving things forward. So we've got 3 zones. We've got the innovation zone, and we hope to have up to 40 suppliers and service providers of that. We've got an all IP zone where a lot of the CPs will be attending, as well as Ofcom and others. And then we have a training and education zone. So really looking forward to our first live event, hopefully lots of activity around that. So once again, thank you for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe.